When my boss tried to frame me to hide his fraud, he thought I would stay silent, but the truth cannot be buried forever. I knew one day his lies would collapse, and I would be there to reveal it. My name is Claire Bennett, and this is how my courage turned his empire into dust. I still remember the day it all began. It wasn't a dramatic storm or a headline-worthy scandal at first. No, like most betrayals, it started quietly, disguised as routine. My boss, Richard Hale, had always carried himself with the kind of charm that could win investors in a single meeting. He wore tailored suits, spoke in carefully measured words, and smiled with just the right amount of confidence. To outsiders, he was a visionary leader. To those of us inside the company, he was something else entirely. Manipulative, controlling, and obsessed with power. For years, I had worked under him, building systems, securing accounts, managing the tedious yet critical tasks that kept the company alive. I wasn't on the front stage like him, but behind the curtains, I was the one pulling the levers. I knew every detail of our contracts, every hidden clause, every weak point that could either save or sink the empire he boasted about. Richard knew this too, and perhaps that's why he saw me as both useful and dangerous. It was during preparations for a massive acquisition deal that things began to change. The company was about to be sold to a powerful investment group, Dominion Capital. The deal was worth hundreds of millions, and Richard wanted nothing more than to cement his reputation as the mastermind who had built an empire from nothing. The truth, of course, was that much of that empire was held together by quiet people like me. People who didn't get the headlines, but carried the weight of the operations. In one meeting, while presenting the transition plan to Dominion's representatives, I noticed something strange. Certain numbers didn't add up. Revenue figures were inflated, contract terms were manipulated, and risk disclosures had been deliberately hidden. I didn't want to believe it at first. Mistakes happen, I told myself. But as I dug deeper, the pattern became clear. Richard had been cooking the books. The realization hit me hard. If Dominion discovered the fraud during due diligence, not only would the deal collapse, but every employee could lose their job. And if the fraud went unnoticed, Dominion would eventually inherit a poisoned empire that would collapse under them. Either way, innocent people, my colleagues, my friends, would suffer. I felt trapped between loyalty to the company and loyalty to the truth. When I confronted Richard in private, his reaction told me everything. He didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, gave me that sly smile of his, and said, "Claire, sometimes leadership means protecting the bigger picture. Numbers are flexible. You, of all people, should understand that." I was stunned. "Flexible? You're hiding fraud, Richard. This isn't protecting anyone. This is gambling with the future of everyone who works here." His smile faded. His eyes narrowed. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't worried about the fraud being exposed. He was worried about me. Because I knew too much. From that day, the atmosphere around me shifted. HR suddenly began questioning my performance despite years of spotless records. Colleagues who once trusted me grew distant, as if someone had whispered poison into their ears. Projects I had been leading were reassigned without explanation. It was a classic strategy: isolate, discredit, and silence. Then came the final blow. During a board meeting, Richard publicly accused me of mishandling critical transition documents. He claimed I had failed to secure sensitive files and implied that I might even be leaking information to competitors. The accusation was absurd, but in the boardroom, appearances mattered more than truth. Before I could defend myself, HR handed me a termination letter. Effective immediately. I walked out of that room with my hands trembling, my heart racing and my mind burning with disbelief. Fired. After years of loyalty, after building the very foundation that kept Richard's empire intact, I was being cast out as a scapegoat to protect his lies. But here's what Richard didn't know. I had already collected proof. Weeks before the board meeting, when I first noticed the irregularities, I had quietly documented everything. Emails, contracts, spreadsheets, every falsified number and hidden clause was safely stored. I knew the day would come when the truth would be needed, and I was ready. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment staring at the city lights, I made a decision. I would not let Richard bury me under his fraud. I would not stay silent while he destroyed everything for his own gain. If he thought firing me would make the truth disappear, he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. I poured myself a glass of water, opened my laptop, and began preparing the files. My hands no longer trembled. Instead, they moved with purpose. Every keystroke, every document I organized felt like laying down bricks of justice. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced by people like Richard. And as I prepared, a strange calm settled over me. Because I knew something he didn't. The empire he had built on lies was already cracking, and I was about to deliver the final blow. The next morning, I woke up with an unfamiliar feeling in my chest, something between fear and fire. My apartment was still dark, but I didn't wait for the sunrise. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the files I had collected. Evidence, truth, proof strong enough to dismantle Richard Hale's entire empire if used correctly. But exposing a man like Richard wasn't going to be simple. He had power, connections, and money. He could spin stories faster than I could tell the truth. If I made a wrong move, he would paint me as a bitter ex-employee trying to take revenge. No one would believe me. I knew I needed a strategy. So, I started by analyzing the cracks already forming in his facade. Dominion Capital, the investment group negotiating the acquisition, had been growing suspicious. I remembered the way their lead negotiator, Michael Torres, had looked at the numbers during our last presentation. His eyes had flickered with doubt, but Richard's smooth talk had drowned it out. If I could reach Michael with the evidence, there was a chance he'd listen. But reaching him directly was risky. Dominion was surrounded by layers of lawyers and protocols. A simple email from me could be intercepted or ignored. I needed timing. I needed the right moment to reveal the truth when Richard couldn't bury it. Meanwhile, Richard wasted no time tightening his grip on the narrative. The morning after my termination, the company's internal newsletter announced my unfortunate mishandling of confidential documents. They made it sound like I had betrayed the company. Reading it, I felt my stomach twist in anger. My colleagues, people I had worked late nights with, people whose workloads I had carried, now believed I was a traitor. Still, I didn't break. If anything, it made my resolve stronger. For days, I stayed in the background, piecing everything together. Contracts, revenue reports, email chains, every fragment painted the same picture. Richard had inflated the company's worth by nearly 30%. Dominion wasn't buying a thriving empire. They were buying a house of cards, and sooner or later, those cards would fall. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. One evening, while scrolling through business updates, I found a leaked report. Dominion's due diligence team had raised serious concerns about Weston Enterprises' disclosures. The deal was on shaky ground. This was my chance. I drafted an anonymous email with attachments, carefully selected proof that exposed Richard's fraud. Before sending it, I hesitated. My cursor hovered over the send button. What if Dominion dismissed it as forged? What if they somehow traced it back to me, and Richard used it to destroy me legally? But then I remembered that boardroom. His smirk, the humiliation, the way he stripped away my years of loyalty with a single lie. No. I wouldn't let fear decide. I hit send. The response was faster than I expected. 2 days later, Dominion postponed their final negotiations. Rumors spread like wildfire. Something wrong in the numbers, Dominion pulling back, deal in jeopardy. Inside Weston Enterprises, chaos ignited. I watched from the outside as Richard scrambled to reassure investors, appearing on financial news networks with his trademark smile. But behind that smile, I could see the cracks widening. And then one night, I got a call. Unknown number, I answered, my heart pounding. Is this Claire Bennett? A man's voice asked. Yes, I said cautiously. This is Michael Torres, Dominion Capital. I received certain documents recently. If what you sent is real, you may have just saved us from a disaster, but I need to hear it directly from you. For a moment, I froze. This was the turning point. Speaking to him meant stepping out of the shadows. It meant risking everything, but it also meant I finally had an ally. I can prove every word of it, I replied, but we need to meet in person. The next evening, we met in a quiet cafe far from the city's financial district. Michael was sharp, cautious, the kind of man who had heard every excuse and every lie. He studied me as though weighing whether to trust me. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were hard copies of the documents, contracts with falsified numbers, emails with Richard's instructions to adjust revenue figures, and hidden liabilities worth millions. Michael's eyes narrowed as he flipped through the pages. This is damning. It's the truth, I said firmly. And Richard fired me to bury it. He looked up. You realize what you've done? This could kill the deal entirely. It could also put you in danger. I don't care, I said. People deserve to know. Dominion deserves to know. And if Richard thinks he can silence me, he's wrong. Michael leaned back, studying me again. Then slowly he nodded. All right, Claire. I believe you. We'll take it from here. But be prepared. The storm hasn't even started yet. He was right. Within a week, Dominion announced they were suspending the acquisition pending a full forensic audit of Weston Enterprises. The news hit like an earthquake. Stock prices plummeted. Investors panicked. The media swarmed, asking questions Richard couldn't answer. And me? I watched it all unfold with a quiet, steady resolve. Richard tried to fight back, of course. He blamed sabotage, hinting that a disgruntled former employee had manufactured lies to derail the deal. He even threatened legal action against unknown parties. But the more he shouted, the more desperate he looked. Meanwhile, Dominion's auditors uncovered more irregularities, exactly as I had warned. Every discovery was another crack in his empire. But Richard wasn't done with me. Late one night, as I returned home, I found an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message typed in bold letters. Stop, or you'll regret it. My hands shook as I read it. For the first time, real fear crept in. Richard had resources. If he wanted to make me disappear, he could. But then I reminded myself why I started this fight. Not just for me, but for everyone whose lives depended on the truth. Fear would not silence me. I tore the note in half, threw it in the trash, and whispered to myself, it ends with him. Not me. Part 2 ends here. With Claire stepping deeper into the storm, Dominion now on her side, Richard getting desperate, and the battle moving into dangerous territory. The storm had truly begun. Dominion's auditors were now inside Weston Enterprises, combing through every detail, every number, every contract. The news networks broadcast updates daily. Irregularities found in Weston's financials, acquisition on hold, Richard Hale under scrutiny. To the outside world, it looked like justice was catching up with him. But for me, living it from the shadows, it felt far from over. The threatening note left on my door haunted me. I couldn't shake the thought that Richard knew exactly where I lived, that his people were watching me. Every time I walked down the street, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder. Every time the phone rang, I hesitated before answering. The paranoia was real, but so was my determination. I had chosen this path. I had chosen the truth, and there was no turning back. Richard Hale wasn't a man who surrendered easily. He knew his empire was collapsing, but he also knew how to fight dirty. He launched a counterattack, through the media, through lawyers, through whispered rumors. Suddenly, articles began appearing online calling me a disgruntled ex-employee, painting me as a liar who had fabricated documents after being fired. Some claimed I had a history of unstable behavior. Others suggested I was working for a rival company to sabotage Weston Enterprises. Reading those lies made my blood boil. This was his strategy: destroy my credibility so the truth wouldn't matter. But he underestimated one thing: the strength of the evidence I had given Dominion. Facts were stronger than rumors. Every day the auditors uncovered something new: hidden debts, fraudulent invoices, secret offshore accounts. Each discovery tightened the noose around Richard's neck. Still, the smear campaign against me hurt. Friends I once trusted stopped returning my calls. Neighbors whispered. Even my family, who lived miles away, received anonymous messages claiming I was in danger of being arrested. Richard wanted me isolated, alone, vulnerable. And for a while it almost worked. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment scrolling through the endless stream of hateful articles, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number again. I almost ignored it, fearing another threat. but something made me answer. "Claire, this is Hannah." For a moment I was stunned. Hannah Collins had been one of my closest colleagues at Weston. She was smart, kind, and had always been quietly loyal to me. Since my firing, she hadn't reached out. I assumed she had turned against me like everyone else. "Hannah?" I said cautiously. "I don't have much time." "Listen, I know what Richard is doing, and I know you were telling the truth. I've seen some of the documents myself." My heart skipped. "Then why haven't you said anything?" "Because I was scared," she admitted. Her voice trembled. "Everyone is scared. But things are worse than you know. Richard is destroying internal records, deleting files, and threatening anyone who questions him. He's desperate." I sat up straighter. "Do you have proof of that?" "Yes, and if you want it, I'll get it to you. But you need to promise me something, Claire. If this goes down, protect the people who don't have the courage to speak out." "Protect us." My chest tightened. She wasn't just giving me information. She was entrusting me with hope. "I promise," I said softly. "No one else will suffer because of him." With Hannah's help, I learned that Richard was planning something reckless. Dominion's audit was closing in, and he knew it was only a matter of time before they exposed everything, so he was preparing to shift blame again. This time, not just on me, but on anyone who had worked closely with the finances, including Hannah. It was the same playbook he had used against me: create scapegoats, destroy reputations, protect himself. But Hannah had managed to secretly copy files before Richard deleted them. Hidden bank transfers, emails between Richard and offshore partners, records of shell companies. It was explosive evidence, enough to not only end the acquisition, but to end Richard himself. When Hannah passed the files to me, I felt the weight of it in my hands. This wasn't just corporate fraud anymore. This was criminal. The question was how to use it. Dominion already had auditors digging deep, but Richard's influence was still strong. If he caught wind of what Hannah had done, she would be destroyed. And if I revealed it recklessly, he might spin the story again before the authorities could act. No. I needed something bigger. I needed to take this beyond Dominion. The idea terrified me. Going to the media meant exposing myself completely. No more hiding in the shadows. Richard would know exactly who had brought him down. But sometimes the only way to fight lies is with light. I reached out to an investigative journalist I trusted, a woman named Sarah Monroe who had built her career exposing corruption in high places. She listened to me in silence as I told her everything. Then I handed over the files. Her eyes widened as she scanned them. "Claire, this isn't just fraud. This is international money laundering. If this is published, it'll explode." "I know," I said quietly. "That's why I need you to do it." She leaned forward. "Are you ready for what comes next? Because once this story goes live, your life will never be the same." I took a deep breath. I've already lost everything because of Richard. I'm not afraid of losing more. What I want is justice, Sarah nodded. Then let's burn this house of cards to the ground. The article hit 3 days later. Front page. Headlines screamed across every major network. Weston Enterprises CEO accused of massive fraud and money laundering. Exclusive. Insider whistleblower exposes financial scandal. And there, in bold letters, was my name. Claire Bennett, the former employee who exposed it all. The story spread like wildfire. Social media erupted. Investors fled. Authorities launched official investigations. Richard Hale, once hailed as a visionary, was now branded a criminal. I watched the chaos unfold on TV, my hands trembling. Not with fear this time, but with relief. The truth was out. It could no longer be buried. But victory came with a price. My phone exploded with calls. Reporters, lawyers, strangers both praising and condemning me. Supporters called me brave. Critics called me a traitor. My face was everywhere. There was no going back to the quiet life I once had. And Richard? He didn't stay silent. At a hastily arranged press conference, he denied everything, calling the article a witch hunt orchestrated by bitter enemies. But his voice shook, his mask slipping in front of the cameras. The evidence was too strong. His empire was collapsing in real time, and he knew it. That night, just as I thought I could finally breathe, my phone rang again. This time, the voice on the other end wasn't anonymous. It was Richard himself. "You think you've won?" He growled. His tone was low, dangerous. "You think you can destroy me with a few files and some cheap journalist?" You have no idea who you're dealing with." I froze, my grip on the phone tightening. "The world knows the truth now, Richard." "It's over," he laughed bitterly. "Over? No, Claire. This is just the beginning. You've made powerful enemies, people who won't stop until you regret this. If you think exposing me will save you, you're a fool." The line went dead. For a moment, silence pressed in around me. His words were meant to scare me, and they did. But underneath the fear, something stronger burned. Resolve. Because Richard was right about one thing. This was just the beginning. Richard's phone call echoed in my ears for days. His threat wasn't just words. It was a promise. I could feel the weight of it everywhere I went. When I walked down the street, I wondered if someone was following me. When I sat in a cafe, I wondered if someone was watching. Fear had a way of creeping into every corner of my life, but I refused to let it cage me. If anything, his threat convinced me that I had hit the right nerve. The truth had power, and Richard was terrified of it. Meanwhile, the world around me spun faster than I could keep up. The government opened an official investigation. Law enforcement raided Weston Enterprises headquarters. Images filled the news. Agents carrying out boxes of files, employees leaving the building with shaken faces. The empire Richard had built on fraud was crumbling brick by brick, exposed to the sunlight of justice. Yet even as the walls fell around him, Richard remained defiant. He appeared on TV, his smile forced, insisting he was the victim of a conspiracy. Some people still believed him. Powerful allies defended him. But the tide was turning, and no matter how loud he shouted, he couldn't drown out the truth. For me, life became a strange mix of relief and chaos. Reporters camped outside my building. Neighbors who once avoided me now whispered words of admiration. Strangers sent me messages online, some praising my courage, others sending threats that chilled me to the bone. One message read, "You don't know who you've crossed. You'll pay for this." Another, "Heroes don't live long." I deleted them, but they left marks inside me that couldn't be erased so easily. And then there was Hannah. She called one night, her voice quiet but firm. "Claire, I don't know how to thank you. You saved me. You saved all of us who were too afraid to speak." Her words warmed me, reminding me why I had started this fight in the first place. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about truth. About giving people like Hannah the courage to believe lies don't always win. But the battle wasn't over yet. Richard still had influence, and he wasn't afraid to use it. He filed lawsuits against Dominion, against the media, even against me. He wanted to bury me in endless legal battles, to exhaust me until I gave up. My days became filled with meetings with lawyers, court dates, and endless paperwork. Some nights I cried, overwhelmed by the pressure. But every time I thought about quitting, I remembered the humiliation in that boardroom the day he fired me, and I knew I could never let him win. Slowly, piece by piece, the case against him grew stronger. Dominion provided auditors' reports, Hannah provided her files, and my testimony tied it all together. Prosecutors built a narrative too solid to break. The trial became a media sensation. Cameras crowded the courthouse. Every word spoken inside was dissected on the evening news. And there I was, no longer the silent accountant in the background, but the central figure in a fight between lies and truth. The day I took the stand, my hands trembled as I swore to tell the truth. Richard sat across the courtroom, his sharp eyes fixed on me like daggers. For a moment, I felt the weight of all his power pressing down on me again. But then I remembered how far I'd come, how much I had already survived. I lifted my chin and spoke with clarity. I told the jury about the false numbers, the secret accounts, the threats. The night I found the note on my door, I laid bare every detail, every scar. And as I spoke, I saw Richard's mask begin to slip. The trial lasted weeks, but the outcome was inevitable. The evidence was too strong, the lies too many. When the jury returned their verdict, guilty on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering, the courtroom erupted. Richard Hale, the man who once believed he was untouchable, was led away in handcuffs. His empire was finished. His power was gone, and me, for the first time in months, I could breathe. It wasn't an easy happily ever after. My life had changed forever. I had scars that wouldn't fade, and memories that would haunt me. Some people still hated me. Some called me reckless, but others called me brave. They sent letters, messages, even came up to me on the street to say thank you. And though I never asked for it, I became something of a symbol, proof that even one person, armed only with truth and courage, could take down a giant. One evening, as I sat by my window watching the city lights flicker, Hannah came to visit. We shared coffee and laughter, small pieces of normalcy I hadn't felt in so long. She looked at me and said, "You changed everything, Claire. You gave people hope." I smiled faintly. "I didn't do it for hope. I did it because someone had to." "Exactly," she replied softly. "That's why it mattered." The chapter of Richard Hale in my life had finally closed, but the lessons remained. Power built on lies will always crumble. Truth may be buried for a while, but it never dies. And silence may protect you in the moment, but courage changes everything. As I turned off the lights that night, I whispered to myself the words that had carried me through the storm. It ends with him, not me, and this time, it truly had. If you've followed Claire's journey, you know this wasn't just a story about fraud or revenge. It was about standing up when you're pushed down, about refusing to let lies define your worth. And if this story touched you, inspired you, or made you believe in the power of truth, then don't forget to support more stories like this. Subscribe, share, and stay with us, because there are many more journeys of courage yet to be told.